How's dinner? Awesome, great. I love power. All right, welcome to the second of two sessions this week for Change You. We're so glad to have you here, and so glad to be in this beautiful, cozy place this winter evening. We have many bios up on Wikio and pictures that tell the story of who we are in this room. So please, if you haven't put yours up, do, so we can get to know who you are. And if you have, thank you. Lots of interesting life stories, lots of richness that we bring to this experience. A housekeeping item I'd like to talk with you about. We have many people in our group who have access issues. And so I'd like to ask you, when you come to the alumni house, if you could please not park in front here. You can park over to the sides or farther away. There is an overflow lot in the back. Please park back there so that it makes this building more accessible. All right, I also want to thank you for your evaluations. We looked at them very carefully, and I was really struck by the goodwill that's in this room. Tonight you're at tables which reflect the small groups that you're in, and this is a wonderful way for you to get to know each other a little bit differently, get to be with some people you haven't been with before. Our fabulous trainers will come and go, but this group will remain in our community, and so these relationships are vital and hopefully long-lasting. We have a very diverse group of people in this room, and I would like to share with you a little bit more about who we are. So, we are 105 complex bodies made up of 36 community members. This is not going to work. We need a technical whiz. Lisa's on her way. Wait, we can just take the air out of my presentation here.
I can do my first couple.
It couldn't be easy. It never is. All right, well, talk amongst yourselves. We are 105 complex bodies, 36 community members, 24 GVSU faculty and staff, and what's not showing there, 45 undergraduate and graduate Grand Valley students. Yay. Not all of us are U.S. citizens. We identify, 72 of us, as women, 33 as men, and some of us identify as transgender. 23 of us identify as people of color, and 72 identify as Caucasian or white. 10 of us do not identify. 10% of us are members of the disabilities community. We represent several generations of life experience. 52 of us identify as straight. 53 of us identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning, pansexual, or genderqueer. Now we're talking. 37 of us identify as coming from a low socioeconomic background. Many of us carry tremendous privilege. And many of us bear in our bodies the consequences of our commitment to social justice. We are 105 complex bodies of fabulousness. This is who we are. are and so much more. So please celebrate the diversity that you are that's in this room. And now I am so honored to introduce to you two organizers extraordinaire, Paulina Hernandez and Suzanne Pharr. And they have a rich history of working together and doing really important work in the South. I'm going to let them give you detailed bios about themselves, but please give them a warm welcome.
Okay, can you hear me? Yes. This is good. Microphone's working. It's a really good thing. Now we're hoping our computer's going to work. Well, I'm Suzanne Pharr, and this is Paulina Hernandez, and we are excited to be here, delighted to be here, and proud to be here. I have to tell you, it just knocks us off our feet that many of you are doing this change here. I don't know if you think this is just like, oh, this happens everywhere, 100 people, 105 people show up more than one night, more than one day. So this is very, very astounding and wonderful. Paulina and I were able to do a talk this afternoon. Some of you were there for that. And tonight we're going to I'll try to tell you, share with you pretty much all that we know and get from you as much as we can. We're very good at, you asked, let me see, who drove us here last night? Here we go. Are we good at kind of grilling people to know everything that you know? We're pretty good at that. We're like big on the questions. So we're going to ask you to be big on responding to that. And so one of the things that we need to do to begin with is it's been a little agonizing to us to think that we can't have each of you, that we'd be 9 o'clock and we'd be ready to go home. But we have been asked that we would introduce ourselves. Yes?
When you talk into your left collar, I can hear you. When you talk into your right collar to that side of the room, I can't hear you.
Yeah, my screen there and my screen there. Okay. So,
What? You got either readjust it or
I don't
have
have any turn up.
centralize it?
This is why you always travel with them. They know about accessories. It's good. Accessories.
Is that better?
Is that better or worse?
Much better.
Okay, when I turn that way?
It's a Bush thing, y'all, so she needs a collar, so we're gonna have to work with that.
I'm actually so hot, I'm about to do the disrobe. Anyway. We had always planned out to say that to the last minute, but it's going to be our final act. So, anyway, Paulina, if you'll introduce yourself. Okay, what else? Is that enough? Now bring it closer. Okay. The full introduction, and then I'll do one.
I asked you to go first, but hello? Hello? It's on. There we go. There we go. Speak right into it. It works. All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Paulina Hernandez. I am on the staff of an organization called Southerners on New Ground as the co-director. We are based out of Atlanta, Georgia. Our administrative sort of headquarters are based out of there, but we work in the 12 states in the Southeast. I identify as queer, femme, Chicana woman, indigenous, mestiza, a southerner, I'm an adopted southerner. I usually spend more time in the South than I have in Mexico, so definitely belong to both. And I came into political organizing through farm worker struggles in North Carolina, through my blood family, and have been sort of engaged in social justice work since then. I was joking with Stan earlier that we've had our 10-year anniversary of working together more officially. So this is a great gift.
Long-term relationship.
No. One of my longest-term relationship, I will say that. Chronic hater, okay. We'll talk about that later. So So this is great. And I've spent quite a bit of my time over the last few years working with Southern gay, lesbian, bi, and trans folks that are very much from the South, working and living and organizing in the South, both in urban spaces and rural communities, and helping to sort of build the capacity of the South to be able to organize as a region and what it means to sort of be a regional organization that's very much responding to sort of common conditions across identity and sort of towards sort of a shared politics. So we're here to talk a little bit about that and some of the lessons learned from our work. So thanks for having us.
Great. And I am a deep South Southerner. You may be able to tell from my accent. I grew up in Georgia and spent most of my adult life working in social justice and trying to build a blood-based movement, working across all kinds of issues. In fact, it's only in the last couple of years that I've been doing LGBT or queer-specific work. That when people talk about intersectionality, I kind of think of my work, and we'll talk more about intersectionality in a minute, but it's about working across all the ways in which we struggle for justice and working across all the ways that we carry many of those struggles and those issues within ourselves. So I've worked for 19 years at the Women's Project in Arkansas, and then after that worked for 5 years as the director of the historic Highlander Center, which I failed to say today when we were talking about Southerners on the Ground as an LGBT organization that works both with trying to get LGBT groups to take on race, gender, and class, and to get civil rights organizations to take on LGBT issues as well as homophobia. One of our strategies was to get inside those that we were, went through those or connected with those, but we weren't inside them. So Highlander would be an example. As a song strategy, I won the board in 1994, I believe it was, and became the first full-time woman director in 1999, and now another song founder is the director of the Highlander Center. So I would call that a success. Yeah, I'd say that's a successful piece of strategy. It wasn't even a sneaky strategy. It was very much people knew that we wanted these organizations to become.
I'm still having a really hard time hearing you.
I'm going to take it off, which is awful today because it made me think that people were doing carpentry in the back of the room and people thought I was hallucinating. But I'm going to try it. How does that? Is that a little bit better? And I'm going to try to keep it also not too close to home. And so that's the work I've been doing. And right now I'm very privileged to work half-time with the Australia Lesbian Foundation for Justice. And what I do there, I work in my home in Tennessee, but I coordinate the Queer People of Color Movement Building Initiative, which is either autonomous people of color groups or is multiracial groups, including white, that are led by people of color. So I get to spend all my time thinking about movement building and working on movement building, and I can imagine for a social justice person there would be any greater privilege than to be able to do that. So, and then Paulina and I have been working both at the Highlander Center. We work through song, and then we're also working through this movement building initiative, which is just to put together a national coalition of queer POC-led groups, 12 groups, and people from 2 collectives that are working on a national strategy together, which I believe is a historic moment for organizing. And as we know, LGBT and I'll use interchangeably queer organizing in this country. So we come tonight, I always feel a little bit like to have the privilege of going somewhere like here is to be on the circuit model. That we bring what we know, we get what you know, and you carry what we know somewhere, and we carry what you know somewhere, and hopefully it spreads all around the country and helps the movement building. So that's where we are tonight. Ground rules, we're going to try to have as much discussion as we can. 2 ground rules. You may be used to more, I don't know. We're going to try to keep it simple tonight as best we can. First ground rule, and you can apply this to the Congress if you want to at the same time, is respect. just respect and civility. And the other one is just my favorite ground rule of all time, which is WAIT, which stands for why am I talking? So if you feel like you've been occupying a good bit of space, and maybe more than once, and there are people who are pretty quiet in the room, step back. So it's a good thing for all of us to learn. I try to do it in my private life as well. And then, ready for the computer? We're going to try our hand at technology here. And see if without spending a lot of time on it. Look at you. Look at you. A lot of reasons to try. Here we go. Just an expanded idea of human rights and see if we have unity on that. We don't have time to do a lot of discussion about unity and how we are as a group, but coming out of the Southern tradition, we spend a lot of time talking about the values you share and the kind of common agreements that you hold, and we'll be giving out some information on that tonight. But in the past, human rights were kind of considered as food, clothing, and shelter, and now that's an expanded idea of human rights. So what we have in this is, and what I like about looking at human rights, it takes us right out of the local and out of the national and puts us in the international. Because we're talking about not just ourselves, but we're looking worldwide on what people should have in their lives, which I think we have to do. So food, clothing, shelter, education, health. And I don't know whether to say health care or health, but I think it's health because it's all those things that contribute to health. I think we have the basic right to that. A safe workplace so that you're not being chemically killed while you're working, that you're not being attacked while you're working. A living wage. Safety in general, and I'm not talking about just the national security state. I'm talking about safety in our homes, safety in our personal relationships, safety on the streets, safety from the police and from the national security state, as well as the safety that's provided to us from the police and from the national security state. And then environmental safety. And I never know quite how to name that one, but when I'm talking about it, and you may have a much better word for this, what I'm about to ask you, is that we have an environment that's not being destroyed, and also that we're not dying from. So that it's both those things. I don't know if environmental safety is the right word, but those two, looking at it both ways. So, would you add another? First, I'm going to ask you where you would add another, and then I'll ask you if you have any hesitation about any of these. Would you add another human right in this expanded idea of human rights? Yes.
Public transportation.
Public transportation. Wouldn't that be a gift?
Today my car was in the shop, and so there was just no way for me to get here if somebody didn't give me a ride.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I said. I should be able to get to my workplace if my car was in the shop.
Right. And a lot of these others can't happen unless either they come to you or you can go to them. So, anyone else? Any other addition to this? Yeah.
It sort of falls into safety, but personal freedom for expression, just that sort of thing.
So, say just a little more about that.
Well,
You
I'm
have those
thinking
two out
about,
there, Colleen? Oh, no, maybe not. Okay, sorry. You said this is flip chart that we just didn't get up to.
I was thinking today, I read a few articles about some struggles happening right now in Uganda, and I was just thinking about the citizens who can't be openly gay and the risk that they face. So just the ability to be able to be out and free.
And could you just say a minute's worth of what happened in Uganda? Because I think most people in the room, there's just a few of us who know about it.
Sure. Well, there's, I'm sure more than I even have any concept of happening, but a national publication posted the top 100 homosexuals in Uganda. And if you all know, recently legislation was passed to make homosexuality punishable by death, I believe. And so this man was
death outside of his home. And now there's a British woman who is a refugee from Uganda who they are considering sending back to Uganda. And she has, I think, maybe 24 more hours before they make the decision. So I was reading about that today.
And just a piece of the backstory on that the kind of conservative fundamentalist messaging about homosexuality was brought into that country by our emissaries, missionaries, emissaries that actually brought that, so that you had a very complex situation of a country that has been so led as, as another form of colonization. We won't get off on that right now, but could I just say we should very much believe with this situation in Uganda. Okay, any that you all have, that you have any sort of trepidation about? Yeah, you had one more before that? Okay.
Yeah, I think mine connects really well to Shirley's, but I was gonna say like free will, just having like you can own your own body and like do as you need to do in your life, like just having free will.
Great. I failed to ask people to give your names so you can get to know each other in the room. That's one of the reason we do introductions, is that we so want people to know one another. Any that you feel reluctance about? Because many of these are up to debate, right on the public square of this country, sitting in Congress right now. Many of these very things. This has always been under great debate. This is under debate. This is under debate. This is certainly under debate.
Are you putting homelessness under shelter?
Yes. Yes, I am. Any trepidation? Yes.
How about freedom of expression?
Freedom of expression, and that kind of goes to what both of you said. And your name? What?
Bernard.
Ernest. Great. Thank you.
Suzanne.
Okay? Yes.
Sorry, my name is Sherilyn, and I was thinking, I'm not sure if it falls under food or environmental safety, but definitely clean drinking water.
Clean drinking water. I would put it in here, and the great battle that we're going into worldwide over who owns the water. We're not going into, we're already in the middle of it. Do we have unity for the most part on these are values that we share? Because they come for certain politics, and you should know that Paulina and I come here with a politic, we're not kind of a neutral facilitator, for good or for bad. But when you move to that, it moves to us having to have an analysis around the economic system that we're living on. We have to look at capitalism. We have to look at the way our values work in this country and how our values are spread worldwide. Do we put people first? Or do we put property first? Do we put oil first? This is a people's first list right here. And when we move to things like living wage, we're calling into question. And the reason I say capitalism, I know this is not an easy subject, okay? But I'm going to let you 2 minutes worth on it, okay? So we will take a very difficult subject. But capitalism demands low-wage workers. It has to have it in order to produce the money, that ownership of kind of money. And the zero sum of that, when you play that all the way down, is the best worker, is the worker that doesn't cost anything at all. Would that be true? So in this country, some of your best workers are people who have either been brought into the country by corporations or have come into the country as workers from other countries and can be used because of their immigration status with very, very low wages. And then we also have in this country kind of the ultimate zero sum of capitalism, which would be slavery. It doesn't get any better than that because you don't have to pay. So when we go to this and we look at this, and this is not to, come in the back door in it. But as we talk about what do we value, we have to value working together to figure out a system. Some people seem to think it's as easy as capitalism and socialism. That's kind of the thing that's going back and forth right now. I don't think it is that easy. I think that we have to figure out a system that honors this and find out how that is. And that's, I gave the students who were in the thing the day of charge, and I give the students here and faculty here tonight the same charge. This is on this one. So when you figure that out, how to do the capitalism, socialism, what's the best economic system that puts people first, email. Okay, that's the introduction to the evening. We're going to talk a little bit about, I'm just give you a rundown of the agenda. We're going to talk a little bit about intersectionality, and then we're going to talk about kinds of organizing. And we're going to try to bring our own experiences to that and ask you for your experiences from that. And then we're going to have a discussion of how change happens. And then after that, we're going to talk about movement skills and leadership practices, and then kind of the who and the what of organizing. Our subject tonight is organizing, and I guess everyone knows that already. And then we're going to talk about a piece of work that is new to us and one that we find really, really exciting, a different kind of conceptual way of doing the work. So that's what we're going to bring tonight. So we'll have a break. We're not going to do much jumping up and down or getting up and down, so we're going to be happy to have a break in a few minutes. So, Paulina. Can you hear me? It works again, yes.
God, it's like the luckiest I've been with technology in a while. So we wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about the kind of frameworks that we've been able to sort of use in our own sort of organizing. And what Jen said is very much right, that we do come in with a particular politic and do not pretend to be neutral about that politic. I don't think some people are like, this is just what we think, and it's kind of either way. We're like, no, we have very strong opinions about it. So this is our disclaimer, if you will, about not pretending to be neutral. We definitely come from a background of anti-oppression facilitation and training, so that's also very much a particular politic and style of training and facilitating as well. So there you have it. So one of the things that we, how many of you have heard the word intersectional before? Raise your hand. How many of you feel like you have a really great handle on what intersection is? Raise your hand. Okay. Can you share? Can you just get one person to share? What is intersectional organizing? I feel like a game show policy. Looking back.
Wait, intersectional organizing?
Yes. Or intersectionality.
Oh, intersectionality, this is my take on it, is, I guess, so cross in between two different identities, or if I'm wrong, please stop me now. Oh, my name is B, like B and such.
So, anyone else? Who else raised their hand that they feel like they have a definition for what intersectional is?
I'm Risa. It's what I see it as the common threads of when you're looking at multiple oppressions or multiple actions, you're looking at the common threads within that.
Awesome. So one of the things that we have really struggled in our work, and as both political educators and people that have spent quite a bit of time sort of helping to unpack this issue around oppression and privilege and the kind of organizing strategies that we think are strategic to sort of meet that moment, is that most of us have had a pretty complicated experience with what it means to sort of do cross-issue work. How many of you have walked out of a meeting or a room or even like a strategy session where you were talking about doing issues across, working across issues, and walked out with like a laundry list of like more than 10 things? Raise your hand. Okay, so that's really complicated, right? Because then I think like the expectation, like I remember walking out of those meetings when I was like younger and being like, oh my God, I have to like go study about the prison industrial complex and about like just everything under the sun, like environmental justice and just everything, because I clearly don't know anything about anything, and to like be able to even come to the table for a strategy that feels intersectional, right? And I think one of the questions that we try to answer with our base, and one of the kind of longings and desires from our base has been to sort of grapple with a framework that feels holistic and that helps to sort of create some containers for how we create strategies together. So we're going to share that, and this is not like the end-all be-all of strategies or even of frames, but it's the one that we feel like most applied to our base, giving sort of a lot of the thinking of our base and a lot of the kind of feedback and work that has been happening in the South. And so we created this thing called like the 4 sort of intersections, or kind of 4 containers of intersectional organizing. And we pulled it from sort of the question that is, what are some things that everybody has a relationship to? It doesn't matter what your identity is, it doesn't matter where necessarily you live or what is your, maybe people say social economic status, but that you have some relationship to, be it positive, negative, complicated. And the 4 things that we ended up landing in that were sort of the bigger things and not just smaller things were, the first one was body. What is our relationship and our people's relationships to our own physical bodies, right? Whether it's around issues of health, whether it's issues around disability, whether it's issues around what it means to be able to walk in the world with the kind of gender that is of your own choosing and having the autonomy and safety to be able to do that, right? So those are some examples. The other container is around land, and we feel like everybody has some relationship to land and to place. And we talk about it sort of as a difference between sort of place and placement, right? Kind of where you are versus where you belong. And that the South in particular has a very complicated history in relationship to land, and both in terms of ownership of land, but also in terms of access to land, what it means to have one of the vastest sort of amounts of rural space in the country. And that there's so much, like there's such little public space even within all of that extent, right? Because most of that is privately owned, and including a lot of what used to be sort of known as sort of like the black belt in the South is becoming less and less owned by black folks and more owned by sort of conglomerate corporations. And so it's kind of it's an ongoing thing, right? Both in terms of like where is it that our people find safety? What is in relationship to rural spaces and urban spaces, in relationship to safety and disability, in terms of community, access to resources, and so all of that having to do with like the kind of our relationship to land, right? Including a lot of the issues related to environmental stuff, and that we know that when there's power plants that need to be built, when there are dumps that need to be built, where are they built? They're basically built in people's backyards, right? And like what that means over and over again, that when we have such a growing sort of expansion of cities, like that often poor people, and we know what those people look like, primarily people of color, a lot of immigrant people, a lot of folks with disabilities, end up sort of having to be able to end up having to live in physical places that end up really harming us, right? Even if oftentimes they're like ancestral lands that are very, very like beloved to people, like know that that's something that's really hard to live with, right? So that's the second area. The third area is around work/labor. So we feel like everybody has some relationship to work or labor, and therefore money, right? And what it means to have sort of economic sustainability in our lives. And particularly for LGBT folks in the South, and particularly LGBT folks of color in the South, this is a really complicated thing as well, right? Like what it means that people oftentimes cannot be able to work in safety or are and sort of pushed to the margins of even like within the labor movement of the South, right? That even in spaces that really prioritize worker safety, even in spaces that really prioritize people being able to have access to an equitable living, folks that are gender nonconforming face a particular hardship. People that are gender nonconforming face a particular sort of like shaming, overall lack of safety in workplace, or are even not even allowed to oftentimes, if there are people with trades, able to work within those trades, right? So we know, like, for example, in the South, we did a Southern Trans report to sort of map conditions for trans folks in the South, and like an extraordinary amount of our Southern trans people are working in underground economies, including sex work, including a lot of, like street economy, a lot of things related to also low worker pay, such as like the direct service industry in the South. Because literally, even if they have a trade, even if they're oftentimes like electricians, carpenters, they're not able to find the kind of work that that comes in their line of work because of, being gender non-conforming or trans, or because they're out and they're queer and a lot of other things, right? So that's a particular relationship, but we know that all oppressed people have some relationship to what it means to have economic sustainability and economic justice in their lives. So that's one of our bigger containers as well. And then the last one is spirit. And I mean spirit as in the broadest sense of the word, not spirit as in the Holy Spirit. Because people are like, I am, recovering Catholic, but it's not the Holy Spirit. So I just for that. But it really is that we know that when you're part of a community that gets told over and over again, you're every parent's worst nightmare, right? You're every parent's worst nightmare because everybody wants their kids to be anything but, queer. Or maybe date a person of color if you're white. But that you get told over and over again. Like, so what happens, right, to our community when there's so much both internalized oppression or internalized, that we internalize within ourselves kind of what the outer message is of the world about who we are, about what is and isn't attractive, what is and isn't sexy, what is and is not accepted. And we know that for a fact that, all of our communities who experience oppression have quite a bit of damage, right? And heartbreak. I don't mean damage like broken, but that we just go through some really hard things and have to really sort of look at the condition of our community for what it means to sort of work together. And one of the things that we were hearing over and over again, and I've experienced as well, has been that, there's quite a bit of dysfunction oftentimes in groups trying to work together and organize together that experience oppression because we haven't dealt with a lot of heartbreak, right? And we haven't dealt with the fact that we need to make a priority, like the fact that, at least for SONG, as a Southern Regional organization, we feel like it is our, the survival, the spiritual survival of LGBT people in the South is one of our priorities, right? That we talk about what it looks like to have resiliency and joy and love and wholeness in our lives. And that we constantly sort of pull from that place. And that we think that it should not be relegated to that's the crunchy stuff that the lesbians do on the side, before the real work happens, right? But that everybody is dealing and holding quite a bit of pain and heartbreak and unresolved things in relationship, also to faith, right? And what it means to sort of our relationship to spirit is very complicated because a lot of us also come from faiths that are not affirming of LGBT stuff, or even for people of color that come from faith traditions that are very, very connected to colonization. And faith as a tool of colonization, right? Particularly Christianity. We have a very contentious relationship with that faith. A lot of us do. So we feel like some of that we have to be able to talk about directly, and we have to be able to also acknowledge that it's one of the conditions of our people in the South, and therefore is one of the things that when we're thinking about strategies to help transform the South, we have to put on the table, right? So those are the 4 containers of intersectionality. Did those make sense? I can run them again one by one, which is land, work and labor, spirit, and body. Does that make sense? Okay. So that's one particular framework that we use. It's not the only one. There's, I think, definitely several different other ways that we slice things. But we feel like it was important, right? In relationship to our base and what it means to actually be able to build intersectional strategies. That when we're thinking that they're coming directly out of the conditions of our base and that they're coming in direct sort of response to what we feel like is happening, right? And so I wanted to open up really quickly for folks particularly that are from this area because we know very little about this area. I had to GPS it to be where are we? Where is it? So, definitely hit us with the knowledge. But I wanted to ask a question about what is one condition. What are people's relationship to bodies here in West Michigan? And we're asking for brief, so you can think about it, and then raise your hand. So y'all did that last time, sure. Yes, they did that last time.
No.
Suzanne, no.
Oh, no. Sorry. I read the wrong agenda.
I see you over there, You can come out, it's all right. We'll do the public shaming later. So what is in your relationship in your own community? And again, we know everybody's not from here, so we're not looking for the finite answer on that, which is your own opinion. So relationship to bodies. Anyone? Would an example be helpful? Okay. So she has one. So I'll give an example and then pass it off to you, Jennifer. So for example, like in the South, we talk quite a bit about what it means to sort of have, like around gender stuff, like what it means that, like the assumption about gender, that it just assumes that you are the gender that you present, and people do not oftentimes ask, and so use adjectives very, very freely, right? And so we see that as one of the conditions of what does it mean in our own communities that we don't have enough sort of curiosity. Oh my God, my English is going down. About the fact that there are more than two genders, and the fact that that different people sort of show up with different manifestations of gender, and that is something that needs to sort of constantly be reaffirmed, right? And so that's one example. But you have.
I was just going to say from.
Can you say your name?
Oh, my first name is Mindy. Hello, thanks for being here. I would say, when you start talking about it, I think for me it's like, as a woman of color, I think, the whole idea of, at least in my community, and the Latino community is, I look this way, I'm kind of hiding behind a hat, I'm pretty light-skinned to most people, they're like, oh, you're Mexican, and my sister's much darker than I am, and so like the whole kind of surprise that people get when they see me and my sister together, we have the same mother and father, just for the record, and just a surprise that like in our own coloring, like how can you guys be related, and then they hear us talk and we're the same. So this whole idea of, sometimes, lighter is more beautiful, and, growing up being called, I'm a pretty one because you're lighter, and, your sister's, darker one. So I think for me, that's kind of like how I see body in my own community.
So we want an example now about your own relationship or your own community's relationship to land. Anyone? Land?
I'm not from here, as you see, I'm here, but I love this place in the summer, not right now. I love it. And in summer, I like to walk for miles and miles along the Muscataba Trail, which goes from Marne to Muskegon. Anyway, I love the trail, it's just like the Garden of Eden to me, but what I find always disturbing are all the no trespassing signs around the trail. And especially the signs outside people's homes that it says, we don't call 911, and it's a picture of a gun. And so to me that's always a little worrying, because I'm like, this looks like the Garden of Eden. Why is there so much fear here? Who are these people scared of? Who's going to come and trespass on them? I mean, so in the middle of nowhere. And so to me, that's kind of hard to understand, this relationship with the land, because I look around me and I feel such love for this land that's just so green and beautiful. It looks like, that God made it yesterday. And then I see a sign that says, we don't call 911, and it's kind of very jarring. So, that's my kind of sort of interaction with the land here.
So we're going to go on to the next one, which is work and labor. Anybody want to share what their own relationship is to work and labor?
Oh yeah, my name is Val. I'm a student here. In West Michigan, there's a lot of farming and whatnot. I'm an immigrant myself, and sometimes people look at me and my parents and they say, or kind of make assumptions about the kind of jobs that they would have. And they also, at work, my parents are questioned a lot because they feel like they shouldn't have as much as they do because they are immigrant. So just that they feel like, because my dad does work on a farm, and some of his friends or some community members ask how we can own a house or how we can each have our own car or something like that. So we just kind of assume that we should live in different housing and have different aspects, I guess.
And the last one is spirit. Does anybody want to share? Spirit. Again, not the Holy Spirit. Spirit.
coming from here. And I can talk about the Holy Spirit as well as the Spirit. What happens here sometimes when people are the LGBT community, when it is oppressed within the Christian community, and the killing of the Spirit, when someone tells you that you cannot love because, or that Christ does not love you because of who you love. But also the work that is being done here to change that. And so that's what I see here.
Thank you so much for that. And we're going to move on to, Suzanne's going to talk a little bit about the kinds of organizing that we feel like actually trying to meet some of these conditions, right? So thank you guys so much for sharing.
Well, maybe I should. Okay, great. We're going to try now to do a very fast, as in we have only 3 hours. This is also been organizing to us to have so much material to talk about organizing and try to bring it down to 3 hours or 2.5, 3/4 or whatever. So we're going to do the best we can with this to pack a lot of information in. And so, you want to pick up on the screen? We're at 4 kinds of organizing. The names of 2 I made up. And the 2 I didn't make up, I want you to talk about first, if you will, and then I'll talk about the second 2. Can anybody here talk about Olinsky style organizing? Is this familiar to anyone? Anyone? Anyone just, Yes, here's the mic.
I'm Kathleen. Saul Olinsky was a community organizer in Chicago, and I think we've probably heard about it most recently because President Obama used that style, but it's getting into the community and figuring out what the community needs and then helping community members find that power and strength within them.
Did this particularly in low-income communities in Chicago? Does anybody else know anything about Olinsky? Because Obama was slapped with this commie kind of organizing. Yeah, great, thanks. Excellent, thanks.
Yeah, I'm Dave, and MidwestAcademy.com. Midwest Academy is based in Chicago, and they teach the Olinsky model. They do great trainings. It's basically, as was said, it's gathering the people who can say I. So I am impacted by these negative things, to speak to power, and it's relatively I don't know what the right word is, relatively non-West Michigan in its verbiage. Because there are people called targets. Those are people in power who can make the difference or can make decisions. You have to have power over those people. Organization considerations and what kind of tactics are you doing. But it is all about the people deciding what they want to work on. And so, again, MidwestAcademy.com. I don't work for them, nor do I get anything from this commercial. They are awesome.
So almost everybody who does organizing in the country right now uses some pieces of Olinsky style organizing, I would say. That it's a piece, there's a piece drawn from it. It also has a lot of controversy in it. The controversy being that it's very confrontational, particularly when Olinsky was doing that you brought great discomfort to your targets, through protest, through being up, in their faces, but also bring them in conflict with their own values. And there was some controversy about it in terms of who was the leadership of the neighbor groups. Was the organizer part of the group, sort of pushing the group? So there's been controversy about it, but it is still a strain. Like the Midwest Academy follows it pretty explicitly, but then other groups who would totally disavow the Olinsky method use pieces on it. So that's one. Oh, sorry, electoral organizing. Come on now.
What is it?
You're gonna have it Starting right now, 2 years. $1 zillion spent. Electoral organizing, what is it? It's what? Voting is getting people to show up, right? It's how many people that you can get to show up. And so it builds power through that. Each of these is about building power. The Linsky method is about taking the power away, and pulling that power up for the people themselves. Electoral organizing is about policy change, about electoral candidates, but it's all about how many people can you get to show up and vote. And so for some people, there's concern if you spend all of your time on electoral organizing, just having people show up and then go back into their homes and back into their communities. How much change are you bringing in terms of what was said on the early thing of join the revolution? Let's say that would not be particularly revolutionary, but it does bring about policy change and affects our lives in very, very important ways. These are the two I made up. There are other names for them, but I call one moral organizing. And the reason I call it moral organizing is the organizing where you're actually expecting the people who oppress you to have conscience. Okay, somebody laughed. It's sad, but it's true. For example, if Gandhi were organizing right now, in this country, would he necessarily be met with the hundreds of thousands of followers, making demands against the authorities that are in control of the country? Would he be met, he and they, without kind of extraordinary violence against them? It's lifting people to, it's asking people to go into, in that case, the colonizers' British soul, or British culture, or this British background, and to care that people care so much about their lives, that they would put their bodies and their lives and their time and their energy and their money out to say, we have to have a life that is different. So another example of that would be the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement was based on the expectation that particularly people of faith and people of conscience would change. Would change in their oppression of African American people in this country, and would say, in response to people being willing to die, would say in response, I grant that at least I'm going to say and put in some laws that indicate that you are fully human. We have not gotten to the full playing out of that yet. But that would call that moral or conscience organizing. Everybody follow me on that? Okay. And then the last one is relational. And do we have that one?
Yes,
Oh, it is passed out. So you have this in front of you. Does everybody got that? This is organizing we're going to talk about in large part tonight. And relational organizing takes from it some of the things from community, it takes from it some of the things from the kind of moral organizing. But it's a little bit of a different kind of organizing. Not everybody does it, but those of us who do it, who think of ourselves as whatever, language fails us these days. You don't know whether to call yourself progressive or lefty or, seriously, what is the word for those of us who want social justice in our time? What is the word for us? I don't know. Email that one to us. you all have the luxury of studying and reading in libraries, unlike us. Right. So take a look at this. The relational organizing is based on building a movement, building a base, and taking on action through building relationships, building connections between and among people. Everybody got the first piece? And that's where the word relational comes from. Don't take this as something that, is You can Google it tomorrow and find a lot about it. I don't know whether you could or not. But it follows a fairly classic method. This was the method that was used when people that first heroic woman somewhere said in public, I've been raped. That was a sentence that was heard around the world, changed the lives of women forever. If someone had courage to say that in some public space, and after that, organizing came, followed by the woman who had the courage to stand up and says, my husband beats me and the children. Changed the lives of women forever. Not just in this country, but around the world. And this is the kind of organizing they did. This is based on a simple kind of pattern. And the pattern that was done through those groups was as simple as this: bringing women together to tell their stories, to tell the truth of the conditions of why it's happening to them, to be able to say out loud, I was raped, and this is how it happened, or my husband beats me because I failed to iron his shirt collars right, that he has broken my ribs, he beats me between my shoulders and my knees so it won't show when I go out in public. They told those stories, and from those stories, people pulled similarities. So if you had a table right here, we were talking about a particular subject, everybody told their story. The next job would be to say, in listening to those stories, what are the similarities in those stories until you get the common themes? And then out of those common themes, you begin to think, why is it that all of these women are telling the same story? Or in this case, this group of gender mixed folks. Why are they telling a story that has so many similarities in it? What could be the cause? And then the asking of what could be the cause leads you then to analysis. Figuring out what that is. So as we look down this, you'll see that. You'll see pieces of that. So in this, it says you break the isolation and silence through storytelling. And tables like this, you want about 8 people. The women's movement was based on consciousness raising. What was consciousness raising? But storytelling. People talking about the truth of their lives. Truth is a very big theme in this. Courage is a very big theme in relational organizing. So you break isolation, you break silence. You get people to talk about maybe the terrible condition of what's happening with one's children. Maybe it's a table of people who have children that they feel like are never going to have a job. They have children they feel like might be shot on the street tonight. They have children that they wonder whether they'll be homeless for their lives. They wonder if they'll die of something caused by their murder. That could be the story that is being told right here. So that's the breaking of the silence. That's the talking about a condition. You identify those common themes and similarities, and you look right down your list here. And then you analyze the root causes, not just the, oh, I'm being beaten because my husband and your husband and whatever have anger. That's not the root cause. You know what the battered women's movement used to say in the 80s? Why men would beat women? A simple 3-word answer. Because they can. It's a huge statement of power. Huge statement of power. So you go to the root causes. Why would then you be able to say, because they can, if that was your analysis? And then you discuss that in relationship to power. This is simple organizing. You can't get from here to there in a way in which you're going to have a community base in the long run unless you do something that brings people together and makes them feel that they are part of the group working together. Then,
It's change.
yeah, identify where change, you all take your pens and write, change that in this sentence. So identify where change might be possible. So where is that place where change could come about? What would you target then? And then you gather information. You have to gather more information. If this group of people is talking about this, and they've identified a place where change might be possible, a lot more has to be done. Because you've got to figure out, why is it possible? How is it possible? Who are the people that could be moved? Who would move with us? You know, to gather more information and bring additional people. And then you develop a strategy. develop skills to meet those strategies, take collective action together. You know, collective is a very bad word these days. Collective is communist. Just as a sidebar, you know, I've studied the right and write about the right and all that kind of thing. One of the oddest articles I ever read was the cell-based church, talking about religious, fundamentalist churches, the cell-based church, based on something like this. CELL as in communist cell. Okay, develop the skills to meet those strategies, take collective action, then debrief the results. After you do the action, what did you do? How did it work? What did we do wrong? How would we do it next time? And then you move back into that process. Everybody got it? ABCs of organizing. Right there. ABCs. But it's based, the question that keeps coming up for Paulina and me and many of us like us trying to work for social justice as you are, all of you in this room, in whatever way that you're doing it, is we don't want just an action. We want a community. You know? We want a sense of place and placement. We want people who are connected together for the common good. We want people to say, yes, I want to pay taxes if that's the way I be part of the community. That I pay the taxes to make sure that the children are taken care of, the old people are taken care of, and those who can't take care of themselves. I want to pay taxes. We want community. We want to be able to say, we're in this together. That's why it's relational organizing. It's not just to get you to come and vote because you got excited or because you were desperate to get somebody else out. You know, whatever your reason was to vote. It's not, it's to do more than that. It's to say, we are in this together. We are connected together. So that when the action takes place and some change comes place, you're doing, and we'll talk about this later, the kind of Gandhian approach. That everything you've been doing is to connect you to each other. Everything you're doing, every step toward liberation has liberation in it. So that when you get there, you're in a place of liberation. You're not saying, Yahoo, we had a revolution, and now how are we going to do it with each other? We're in this state in this country right now, I believe, and we talk about this a lot at Solomon and other places, where we have to rebuild people. We have to rebuild people and whole communities. So that's the thinking behind relational organizing, and why would we be talking about it more tonight. Now, should we take a little break? I'm scared to take a break now, since you have the whole way to do organizing. You can be out of here if you want to. We do have a few more little things to say. So why don't we take about a 10-minute break? It's about 10 minutes.
All right, so we're gonna rock and roll. Okay. So we're gonna start actually using the podium mic, if you'll feel okay with that. We're clearly having like a Madonna moment over here with like my freestanding mic, but it's really hard to hear, so we will now be contained to the podium. I was like, is this one yours? It has lipstick on it, babe. So we wanted to spend the next little bit of time talking about what our belief is about how change happens. And I'm going to ask the folks that have the, Lisa, the handouts, so we can get them passed out. Thank you so much. And talking a little bit about a framework in which we use in our own political organizing work, which was not created by us, but created by many, many legacies of organizers that have been doing work examining and dismantling sort of oppression and sort of thinking about what are ways and frameworks, a way of understanding power that help us to sort of talk about oppression in a really concrete way and therefore sort of lead to strategies about how to dismantle oppression. So raise your hand if you've seen this before. Or something that looks like it before. Raise your hand so everybody can see you raising your hand. Awesome. So, we have a handful of folks who've heard about this. So we call this the sort of the 3 I's. And by we, I mean a lot more people, not just the 2 of us. That would be awesome though. We came up with it. It's brilliant. But it's called what is called the 3 I's of oppression, or power and oppression. And so they are, as you see here in this lovely chart, is institutional, interpersonal, and internalized. So this is kind of a helpful frame for us to be able to actually talk about that when many of us are organizing for social justice or for change, many of us are focusing on only one area, right? So for example, policy work is one particular example of social change, or electoral politics. Electoral politics? Yeah, okay. And that, pronounce it right, is, for example, one particular example of institutional social change, right? The assumption that if you only do institutional change, then everything will change, right? Or that if you focus on changing and transforming institutions, or reforming institutions, if you will, then social change will trickle down to the people. And the people will be transformed with that institutional change and will therefore, it'll just be heaven on earth, because institutions are getting their act together, so it's fantastic now. Another one is interpersonal change, which is what we call sort of person-to-person change, meaning that's the kind of changing hearts and minds. That if you focus enough energy on helping, for example, white people believe that people of color are full people and that fully believe in our humanity, then all racism will be dismantled because, people just change their hearts and their minds and they love it. And does that usually dismantle worldwide white supremacy, changing hearts and minds? No, I see some heads no, not really. So that's one particular sort of area, right, of or one particular sort of corner of oppression and power, interpersonal, or the relationships, for example, that when a lot of us are politicized, initially politicized, or realize that oh my God, it's not just happening to me. Oh, and now y'all paying too much of me. See, just can't make them happy. I don't know. Thank you. Is that better? No. Is that better? Is that better? Okay, so if I hold it, it's better. I got you. Awesome, put me to work. So the other one is interpersonal. So by interpersonal, when a lot of us initially become politicized, a lot of us actually, most of the time, at least in my own experience, are very much politicized by our own sort of experience of interpersonal oppression. Meaning that we focus on that one racist teacher, that one homophobic cop, that one sort of really abrasive community member that just, it's very, very classist, or, has a very complicated relationship to money and therefore, poor people or whatever. And then it takes us a kind of a while, right, to figure out that wait, this is one person within a much bigger picture, right? And so that measures that we oftentimes take to sort of create punitive things for people who are actually only players in a system of oppression don't generally translate to institutional change, right? How many people have experienced that? That it's if you fire that one person, the world will be a whole better place, and then you're wait a minute. They sent another carbon copy of that person. What is happening? So that's one particular sort of area of it. The other one is internalized. And by internalized, we mean by what is happening with each person, what are kind of our own beliefs about the kind of both oppression and power that we hold sort of within ourselves. So this is very much about our relationship to ourselves, in relationship to our own privilege, in relationship to the oppressions that we experience, and what our beliefs are about the world based on that relationship to either oppression and privilege. Does that make sense? So, for example, we have had a really hard year as the gay, lesbian, bi, and trans community at the national and international level about what our young people are telling us their beliefs are about how the rest of the world values their lives. And that has come about in a massive amount of teen suicides of gay, lesbian, bi, and trans young people
all over the country. And we see that as a really indirect effect too. Is it just that they're really depressed and they just need counseling? I mean, what is happening with them, right? If they were just getting counseling and like had like their, they use the term for, you know, if you're a gay boy and your best friend is a straight girl, what we would call her, if he just had one of her, you know, if you just had like your one straight friend, like the world would just be a better place. And y'all could go like shopping together, it would be amazing. You know, like the world would be a better place, right? Versus like what is actually happening? Like what is the message that our young people are getting, that they're taking their own lives because they feel like there's nothing left for them, right? And then we tell them that it gets better. But does it get better? No?
Yeah.
It gets better? Okay. Do we get better? Does the world get better? What gets better? Both?
Our community gets stronger.
Okay. But it gets better because we make it better, right? And I think that that's the part of the thing that got lost for a lot of us in that messaging, is that it was a really, I feel like, good effort and a really good thing that it actually was asking adults to speak to young people, right? And it was asking adults, adult gay, lesbian, bi, and trans people. And for many of you that don't know what I'm talking about, I should really slow down and explain what I'm talking about. There's this thing called, this media project called It Gets Better. And it was started by this blogger called Dan Savage that was sort of in response to the teen suicides and asking people to just go on YouTube and create a short video and put it online. And then created a website that was basically asking young people to go to this website and see these videos. And the response has been amazing and phenomenal. Right, and people have really, and I think that one of the things that we were talking about both within our base and in our work is that it tapped into a really deep need of gay, lesbian, bi, and trans adults and elders to support young people. And so that's always a wonderful and amazing thing, right? But the message about it gets better, it gets better for some people because some people grow up to be white men. And for some of us, you know, like, do you get more sympathy as a young Latina woman, or do you get more sympathy as an older Latina woman? Like, I don't know. I don't know if it gets better, you know? And so the question that we've been asking and our sort of in response to that has been, it gets better because our people make it better. And yes, we get stronger, and yes, we are able to sort of deal with homophobia in better ways because we are surviving in different ways and thriving in really different ways. But the truth is, it gets better because people care about making it better. And that's the way that it gets better, right? And so for us, we see that as one particular way in which when you take into account all three sort of ways in which oppression plays out and the sort of three intersections of oppression, how you are able to also not just map out conditions about what is happening in those three areas, but are actually able to also respond in ways that acknowledge that oppression doesn't just start in one of those three, right? But that it actually, like the oppression very much needs people to be players within oppression, right? That it's like any other system of oppression. You need people to comply. With that, you need people to internalize the message and then to just go along with it. And then oppression, just like colonization, runs itself. It just runs itself. You don't need, like, you know, like people were, like, you know, many of you know, like with countries that are colonized and occupied, oftentimes the Europeans see, and it just runs itself, right? Because now there's ethnic divides, and now there's classifications about light-skinned people run stuff and dark-skinned people, they work, you know, and everybody else, and so we take on all of those beliefs, right? And we can't pretend that we're sort of completely separate from the kind of systems of domination and control that we experience in our lives. For example, our relationship to capitalism and money, right? And capitalism right now pretty much runs by itself because we're part of it. We're spending money we don't have, you know, like we count on cheap labor. I mean, I'll be the first one, I'll be like, oh my God, $10 boots. I'll be like, wait, what has to happen for me to be able to buy $10 boots? You know, like, because I would not make no boots for no $10. So, you know, like somebody's doing it and they're probably doing it for $5. Somebody else is making $5 more, right? And so like, and I'll be the first one, I'm like, I participate, you know, like we all participate, right? That like, and so I think that it's one of those things that when we're talking about how does change happen, really sort of using, we use this framework to also both be able to do political education, but also talk about like the root causes of oppression, right? And that those are two of the, you know, like the sort of, it's just one framework, it's not the end all be all again, but it's one of the ones that we find the most helpful for being able to talk about it. And some of the questions that arise from this is, what are the institutions that we invest in when we're talking about institutional oppression? What are the institutions that we are actively contributing to staying the way that they are, right? So, I just gave my own example about capitalism and spending and, all of that good stuff. But many of us contribute in many ways and give our body and our life energy to institutions of oppression, right, every day. And it's not to say, like, let's be purist about it, and if we all, like, just stop going to school, then, like, schools will stop becoming whatever it is that they are now. It's like, no, right? Like, we believe that while we're building and helping to transform institutions, we also need to be building alternatives to the things that we're trying to transform, right? So that we also sort of lessen our dependency on institutions of oppression as well, and are not asking people to sort of completely disconnect from infrastructure that there's no alternative to right now. Because that's been one of the things that one of our song board members, Steph Gilliu from Project South in Atlanta, Georgia, says all the time. She was like, people keep saying, like, if we had the kind of money that the federal budget has, we could do some big things. Like, I hear this all the time. And Steph was like, you know what, y'all? Like, we would have to give it back the next day because we don't know what we would do with it. We have no big plans. We're not building to scale. Like, we have tiny organizations that have the same 10 members that they've had for 10 years. And we're not building out. We're not building scale. So what is it, that, like we say that, like, be able to make sure that we have the scale to sort of match the kind of demands that we want to be able to make, right? It's also really important. So that's kind of an ongoing question in our work, like what institutions do we invest in and what ways are we investing in those institutions? What are we doing to intervene around systems of oppression, and particularly the institutional ones, and actually all three of them? Like, what are the ways that we're intervening at the same time that we're doing something to replace them? Because that's the third question. What is it that we're doing to replace institutions of oppression? Because one of the things that we also talk about, I think, all the time with sort of going hand in hand with what Pharr said, was that if we have a particular sort of critique of capitalism as an economic system and as a social order in particular, capitalism as social order, then what is it that we're going to replace it with? What is it that we're thinking about? What is the rest of the world doing? How is the rest of the world dealing with its wealth, with its resources, with its capital, with its people? Like, what is the different way? Because it's one of those things that it's like, when you live in the US, you are so embedded, right, in what it means to live here, that people who travel abroad or go to other countries where you have a completely different kind of social order, people are like, oh my God, how can people live like this? It's a totally different, it's like, right. But you're so in it, we don't even see it, right? We don't even know how the rest of the world oftentimes is creating alternatives to not just capitalism, but to kind of how people are doing governance, right? That the US very much sort of takes it upon itself to sort of take democracy or spread, as long as we spread democracy throughout the rest of the world, then the world will be like a happier place. And we oftentimes have the rest of the world being like, that's not how we govern. Because you guys don't have a true democracy, you have a representative democracy, and we want to talk about something else. And so like there's multiple things happening, right, around the world to sort of help figure out how to reshape power. And so one of the things that we wanted to talk about is to talk about two kind of extremes and dichotomies, if you will, about how change happens. And the first one that I wanted to talk about, and Pharr is going to talk about the second one, is one of the ways that we've seen change happen. And again, change is a neutral term, right? Not like good change, bad change, but it's kind of as a neutral. We mean social justice change, we mean like change towards liberation. And sovereignty and autonomy. And we know that a lot of the kind of social change that has been happening in this country has been very much about self-interest and rage, right? That there's been a huge movement to change this country, to sort of run on the axis of self-interest and rage, that sort of holds up individuality as the main way to function, that as long as you have your needs met as an individual, then the market will take care of itself. I mean, the market is doing its thing. You worry about you. You worry about sending your kids to college and the world will be fine. Like you worry about your parents and what's going to happen to them when they age. And the rest of the world will take care of it. The market fluctuates and it does its thing, but eventually, it fixes itself. You just worry about you, right? So there's very much like this idea that as long as you take care of your own individual needs, then the world will just, be all peaches and cream. Is that really Southern? Peaches and cream, okay. I just want to say that these words, okay. The other one is around what we call mobilizing resentment. A huge way that the right wing in the US has organized over the last several years, primarily since desegregation has been around mobilizing resentment. And primarily what we mean is white resentment, white middle class resentment against people of color for desegregation. Particularly we see as a huge wave of it in the South, right? And I'm sure other communities as well, but particularly in the South as a place that was seen as sort of taking, like confronting Dixie or Old South, and confronting Jim Crow, and like the audacity of those Black people, like how dare they think that they can eat next to us, and go send their kids to the school that we send our kids to, and all of this other stuff, right? And basically pulling away from public space instead of giving up on public space. And that's a lot of the things that then came with what we call like the detaxation movement and Reaganomics, or the economics of Ronald Reagan, that were very much about like defunding. Right, that it's like we are no longer worried about public institutions because like now they're mixed. Like what? Like they can have the public library, like they can have public schools. That we're going to send our kids to Christian academies. We're gonna create a voucher system that runs also on public money, but it's not a public institution per se, right? And so we saw that as a huge thing, and particularly the term mobilizing resentment was coined by this institution called Political Research Associates. And Jean Hardesty, a very, very brilliant researcher in our movement. So if you don't know anything about Public Research Associates, look them up. They're based out of Boston, I think still. Yeah, they're still based out of Boston. And they do fantastic work and documentation in particular about the right and about both in terms of, like white supremacy worldwide, what are the active groups that are organizing in the right wing, and what is the relationship between some of the extremist groups that are out here very much on like the edges and the fringes, even of the right wing, like the KKK, the white supremacy, and their relationship to the more kind of liberal kind of, right wing movement. So that's one particular one. The other one is sort of, and it's related to that, is around reaction and backlash. The kind of backlash that happens whenever there's sort of an expansion of the we, right? So you saw, for example, like the huge backlash that happened right after Obama was able to sort of pass the healthcare bill. Did anybody notice the huge backlash? Is it just us? I don't know. Like the kind of like disproportionate amount of backlash and huge resentment that came with that, right? And that you have people voting against their own best self-interest, they're explicitly against their own best self-interest, just to be able to sort of mobilize resentment very much, right? Like around like the idea of like, we're becoming socialists, we're becoming a welfare state. What is happening? I don't want to pay for nobody else's healthcare. Like I can barely pay for my bills. And it's like, right, interesting, you should say that. So it's like, what is happening around that, and so we see that there's been a huge shift in this country around being able to sort of use particularly like huge public backlash as a way to influence public debate, right? As a way to influence public debate, and then knowing that we are a country where particularly in state-to-state communities or a statewide level and in local communities, that we know that being able to influence the public discourse around an issue is huge. Because we are in a country that also very much public opinion very much dictates public policy at the statewide level, right? So if you have enough people, even though they don't understand the issue or they don't understand like the nuances of it, if they are able to sort of, if you're able to sway public opinion in one way, you can pretty much then, public policy sort of does the rest, right? It sort of, it is able to sort of roll back a lot of the kind of wins of liberation movements as well. And then the last two that I was gonna say are around wedge issues. And wedge issues, we talk about wedge issues as issues that are basically sort of introduced or are what we call sort of like very divisive issues. So for example, what is one of the biggest wedge issues that we've seen in the last couple of years? Anybody?
Gay marriage.
Gay marriage. They don't even call it gay marriage. Same-sex marriage, what do they call it? The homosexuals trying to get married, trying to have a big party, how dare they? Trying to ride the alimony pony like the rest of us. I mean, what is happening over there? So, it's like how, and it's a huge wedge issue. I mean, I joke about it a lot, but it's a huge wedge issue, right? And the one that, like, if you put on the table, like, pretty much that it's specifically
meant to sort of polarize people, right, automatically. And so the right wing specifically has put same-sex marriage and has created such a polarizing public debate around same-sex marriage and equalized or sort of, made together the connection between, for example, pedophilia and queerness. And so that it becomes a very loaded issue, right? So then you get to the debate about that now it's civil to have a debate about gay teachers? Really? Like we're back there? Like we're back to discussing whether it is safe to have our children around gay, lesbian, bi, and trans people. Like we don't have children of our own, right? Or like there's no, so it's so very much like sort of it's influencing the public debate and then being able to sort of put an issue on the table that is going to split communities around and being able to sort of use that to mobilize, to continue to mobilize resentment and fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of the fact that oftentimes people more and more live in very segregated and isolated communities, and not just the suburbs, right, but even within urban spaces that live in, and so they don't know. People don't, it's one of those things like when you what do they say, when you know better, you do better, which is not necessarily the truth, but when you have people in your life that are affected by certain things, and you have some kind of relationship to those people, then your opinion shifts, right? But with the more and more kind of both like physical and kind of structural isolation that people experience, it becomes less and less the case. And you can put on the table things like same-sex marriage and immigration and many other things, and they become very huge dividing issues, right? And so it's one of the tides that we have also seen the right wing very much sort of be on the wave of. And now that I've depressed you all to death, Pharr is going to talk about some of the better ways in which we've been able to sort of shift power.
I think we're getting at that time of the evening where I need to take my watch off like the preachers do. Get it right there in front of you and know that time will run out. Now I want to check this microphone because I know my voice is the one that's been the most problematic. Is it okay for everybody? And if it's not, just give me a little sign. So Paulina talked about self-interest and rage. I want to talk about the flip of that, which is survival and resiliency and vision. And I think that's where we want to be. Because in the work that I've been doing over the last several decades, I've been doing it more than several decades, but particularly in the last 2 or 3 decades, over and over and over, people have said to me, we're so tired of reacting. We're so tired of always responding to this bad thing that's happening. And so that we never set the agenda for what we want and the vision for what we want. And so this idea of survival and resistance and resiliency and vision, rather than being individual, is about community. Rather than being about taking care of me and mine, it's about a collective approach. And I believe that's where most of us, I'm making assumptions here because we did the thing about human rights, so that's where we want to be, is in that sense, in that place of community. So we're struggling with issues like, how do we have power within our communities so that, our communities are under such onslaught of attack, defunding, of what we used to call in the South, this is a hard one for me to pronounce, but the Walmartization of the country. It started in Arkansas where I spent about 20 years of my life. And, Sam Walton owned Kresge, and they went from that and created Walmart. And we used to do a tremendous analysis of it in the 80s about how this would lead, this way of functioning in terms of corporations would lead to basically an economic downfall. But that Walmartization took away our communities. So our communities became strip malls with downtowns that were either just for events, to have the parade, to have the celebrations of the 4th of July, but not a place where people really could live. Same for our cities. Not only did we have white flight, but then we had economic flight, and then we had that flight to the suburbs where everything became kind of mall-centered and strip mall-centered. And in the South, what I see that's so heartbreaking to me is now that the strip malls are empty, they're still building new strip malls. Do you see that here? All the times. What do we need? Another strip mall when this one just quarter of a mile down the street is closed. Every store in it is closed. And so we're trying to figure out how to create community, and that's community within an urban setting or community within a rural setting. How do you bring back community when you don't have a public space to meet? I'll ask you about one of my favorite groups of people in the world, about teenagers. I love teenagers. But where do teenagers have to go? When you're in that age where you can't really yet have a job, a driver's license, all your hormones are running, zippity's out. I hope most of you all can remember that, if you're not still running, or even if they're running a little slower speed. Well, in the small towns that I know, in the small cities like the one that I live in, that has about 200,000 people, the only place left for them is the mall. And then the mall now has great policing, great restrictions. And so we have teenagers growing up in a country that has become so filled with criminalization, so filled with the development of prisons, and no space to go and be. That's an extraordinary situation, I think. An extraordinary situation. To not have that public space, to have parks that are virtually off limits because of how teenagers together are perceived as gangs, particularly along racial lines, but also along other lines, economic lines in particular, and how people are broken up from that. So we're looking for power within, how to build community, and also how to stop at the same time the attacks against us. We can't do just the one. We wish we could do just vision, but we also have to have that hand up to say, no, you won't take away the complete social contract. We will have a commitment to live in community together. And then we're trying to figure out within our organizations how to share power. That's been handed out, I think. I'm not going to go over that. And how to do shared values. You'll have two pieces, and then there's a really great piece. What's the thing you put them up on? Not Piggly Wiggly. What's it called? Colette, what's it called? What? Wiggly-O? Piggly Wiggly, the grocery store chain in the Deep South. Fascinating name, don't you think? You know, we are not known for being universally skinny in the South. So there are two things there that we are dealing with very deeply as we try to create communities. Where is public space? What is happening with privatization? You know, when all of our public services go into private hands, and we're trying to figure out how do we work together in a way that's new, where we do have shared values, and then where we do try to figure out how to share power. So that's under survival and resistance and vision. And then the same part of that is that piece that I talked about earlier, where we try, and these are hard things to try, is how to have what we would call a Gandhian vision or Martin Luther King vision. Not that we're promoting the charismatic leadership of either, but the gifts that they have given us have been extraordinary. When you think of the last 2 years of writings of Dr. King and the concept of beloved community, this is a gift. This is, I think, such a goal for us to work with. You have one of the best examples of it in the country, led by the thinking of Grace Lee Boggs out of Detroit. And I talked about her today, asked people to Google her. She is about 95 now. She's Asian American. She still has a very, very active political practice in Detroit, and it's based around the concept of beloved community. So it's worth your time to look into that. So that's the piece on how change happens. I want to add one more thing here, and then we're going to do one to close it, because this part, because we want to get lots of questions and comments from you all. In order to make this happen, we not only have to figure out how to share power, when we have to figure out how to create shared values that we believe in, that we follow, that we hold each other accountable to. You know, that so we're building around something, around, not randomly, but around concepts of who we are as human beings. But we're trying to build a movement. That's why we do organizing. Not only to change little pieces of things, but to get a larger landscape of change. That's what we're trying to do. When I say we, I'm talking about the we in this room. I don't know why you would have showed up last week when it was snowing so hard. I don't know why you would have showed up tonight. Had you not already had experience and desire for building a movement, already engaged in that and wanting to continue that in some way in this collective manner. This is what we dream of, is this room of people. This room of people that comes together and says, we want social justice. We want change in our time. We want change for ourselves. We want change for our children. We want change for generations to come. We have the legacy of change in our bones, you know, in our blood, and that's what we want. So, to do that, I'm going to recommend just a few movement building things. This is a little nuts and bolts. This is not very whatever. But I think we've got to have some movement skills and some movement practices, which is going to require lots and lots and lots of leadership. So, one of those first skills, now, you all can figure out collectively how to get these or how to develop them. But I think we're in desperate need of facilitation skills. We got a yes over there? Got any more yeses? We need them so badly of how to work in a room and preferably with smaller groups of people, to really engage people and to facilitate and get to a point. And to do that in a way that's respectful and decent and kind and accountable and clear and not afraid of conflict, you know, having all of that. Then I think and these are not necessarily in order of importance, but I think we really need to know something about logistics. Like, how do you get 100 people in this room? That's a logistical. Where are you, Carrie? Do you know anything about that? I think we all need those skills. If you want to have a small community meeting, how do you get the people there? What do you do with them once you get there? How do you move to do an action? How do you make things happen? Just the logistics of it. Now, everybody does not have to have these skills equally, okay? But we need to, as Paulina was saying earlier to me, in our leadership practices, to know where our skills are best and what ones that we might improve on, so that we can share this aloud. But the facilitation skills, I would love to spread that just as wide as you possibly can, because if I can do it as an introvert who lives a public life, I think you can do it. I know that no one thinks I'm an introvert because this is my public life, but you know, it takes me about 2 days of totally internalized stuff to overcome. Having been with you all. I want to make it like you did this to me. Then I think the skill that we need to work on, and this is one of the great things of having this in a university setting, is good research, both on the academic level, but really on the community level, participatory research, where people are researching what's happening in their own communities. And the academic research supports that. The people from the community can come to you and say, we don't have time to do this particular piece, but could you do this statistical part? You know, or could you do this, or could you do that? So it's always this partnership. I don't believe this town and gown stuff makes me just wild. I have never liked it and never want to see it split. I think the university should be integrally involved in community all the time. And then there's my favorite one. This is not a skill. I don't know well, maybe it's a skill too. Discipline and rigor. I think we've gotten awfully sloppy, you know, and we need to bring more discipline and learn. It's not just a work ethic, but making sure that we do things the very best we can. We prepare for things, you know. We try to bring our best self. We don't miss a great opportunity. That any time when there, as I say, 3 or more people gather, that's an opportunity to make change right there. Documentation of what's happening in our communities, what happens in our meetings, what we can learn from what we've done, you know. If we could document that some, would really be helpful to us. Then I'd be able to say, here, this is what I did last year, take this, you know. And 17 people were involved in this, and this is what we learned. It's documented right here. So you could read it, or you could still watch it and be able to use that. And then communication skills. And that's not only in facilitation, that's just in talking to each other. Having the graciousness when people come in to help people feel at home, that this is a place where you are expected, wanted, and desired. That how can we make this a warmer, more welcoming place for you? Communication skills, but also communication skills on another level. Week before last, I went to San Francisco and worked with a group called the Transgender Intersex Justice Project. Magnificent week for me. It was a week that I described afterwards as having really stretched my politics and my heart and my mind. These are transgender women who work, that's how they describe themselves, who work with transgender women in prison and coming out of prison. Women of color, actually, trans women in prison and coming out of prison. These are people who are kind of at the center of women hating in this country, and at the center of sexism in the queer movement and in the trans movement. Okay? Doing extraordinary work. And so one of the things we talked about was relational organizing. I said to them, we met 2 or 3 hours twice a day for 7 days. Wonderful. And one of the things I said to the different configurations of people, what do you think that TGIJP does best? And to a person, they said, giving us this sense of this is where we are whole. This is where we have family. And the question then is, how do you reproduce that? That is relational organizing. But person after person after person said, within a trans woman of color community coming out of jail, what is there available for you to do for work? There's the streets in one way or another, drugs, sex work, tremendous violence involved in that, tremendous health risk involved in that, tremendous always issues coming at every turn. And in the middle of that, this is a place where we feel family, where we feel home. And that to me was just an extraordinary thing of how that was communicated in that, and then how we would, as TGIJP, communicate that to the world when they have 2 employees now and are about to grow to 4. And one of the things we talked about was communication in this period of time when you don't have very much money in your organization, how you can move your faces and your voices without having to move your bodies. So putting it up on YouTube, the couple of minutes of people, trans women, talking about prison, talking about the conditions there, talking about coming out of prison, talking about the conditions there, how to put it in on their website, how to put it on other effective websites. I said immediately you begin to have not only, as far as I know, the only organization, not just in the U.S., but in the world, that does this work. You're able to have immediately an international presence. Because everybody that goes on the internet, if we get it fixed up in the right way, will be able to get to you just like that. That's the kind of communication I think we have to think about. How do we take the means that we have in a hard economy and nonprofits that not having much money and many of them are dying. How do we take our work and, as Paulina says, how do we then amplify? And then the last things that I think we need to work with on ourselves very hard with is strategic thinking. You know, how do we take ourselves, what is the most strategic thing for us to be doing with this great energy, with this number of people who are in this room? What is the most strategic work, the best use of time, the best use of energy, and an analysis that leads us to that strategic thinking so that we look at what is it we want to do out of Change You? Is it something as a whole? Is it people working individually in different communities? You know, what is it? It could be a number of things. But how do you do that? And how do you do what that is on a basis of continuation, not just as something happens and then because people graduate, you know, if you're a student, then it's gone. I believe every one of you who goes through Change You and does whatever follows that, when you graduate, you're going to take that somewhere. I would, if I had the power, I would demand it of you. Don't have that power, but I sure would love to do it. Say, take it somewhere. Spread this thing. We need a movement that goes across the country. We don't need more and more nonprofit organizations that are in competition with one another. We need a movement that spreads across this country. So we're going to have one more little piece, and then we're going to have 45 minutes of discussion.
Okay. It's just hard to follow y'all, so. I know, thanks. So we just, I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about an additional sort of framework that we use in our work, and that was sort of evolved over the last few years in the evolution of what we call the Song Organizing School, which is kind of our flagship program at Song, or has been over the last few years, and it's changing somewhat with our new sort of 7-year plan coming out of our work. But one of the things that we talk about all the time, right, is that it's not enough that our people are getting trained, right? That it's not enough that we say what our skill sort of gaps are, and that, you know, if we get enough training and support and you know, talk to each other more about what those skills are and share them or whatever, that's the work, right? That's just like the prepping for the actual work. And sometimes we get really confused about what the difference is. You're like, but I went to like 12 conferences last year, and you're like, great. What happened when you came back home? You know, like, oh, you're just really smart. That's fantastic. We need smart people. But it's like, you know, what is the sort of like the next step to what it means to sort of have political education, have political discourse, and be able to engage with other people about what your shared beliefs are about the world and about strategies, but that this is to serve a particular need and purpose, right? For us to then be able to sort of what we call sort of be transformed in the service of the work that is at hand. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about one of the frames that we use to talk about that and to sort of do a lot of our political education. Because one of the things that we hear all the time is that, you know, like if enough, that it's like if we understand oppression well enough, then that'll be enough, right? Because then we'll understand it and we'll know when it's happening, and then we'll talk about it with each other, and then what? And then we will counter it and intervene, right? But then what? So what happens when we actually, and this is sort of comes to that question that our beloved Steph brings to us all the time, and it's like, well, then what? Then what happens after that, right? After you build the skill, after all of that. And we realized that we were having a rather huge lack of imagination about what comes when you, what happens after you fight power, right? And it's like, what do you replace it with? Oh my God, what? Who knows? And it's that we had to sort of create some language for it, right? And then we went into sort of a period of study for ourselves in terms of what happens with global movements, what things can we learn from the Black liberation movement, what things can we learn from the indigenous liberation movements, what kind of can we learn from liberation movements around the world. And one of the things that was sort of kind of a common thread was this thing around third space. And third space, and I'm going to do my best attempt to unpack it as I understand it, is that most of us live in what we call sort of like the first space, right? Which is like the space of capitalism, it's kind of our everyday lives where we experience oppression and racism and homophobia and transphobia and economic injustice, and it's sort of like the kind of social order that we live in every day. And that most of us become very politicized by that at some point in our lives, and are very angry about it and have quite a bit of emotion because of our personal relationship to different systems of oppression, depending on what it is, and mobilize to counter that oppression, right? So we end up doing work that is anti-violence work, which is incredible work. We end up doing anti-capitalism work, or we end up doing anti-homophobia and transphobia work, right? But what would it actually look like to be able to organize for something that is not just against something, but it's actually building towards what it is that we want to replace that with, right? So we see that as like the kind of anti-something as the second space, right? Which is like the space in reaction to the first space. And so we see that the grounding for a lot of our work is kind of trying to build towards the third space, which is what, again, like coming from a lot of like knowledge and experience and sort of thinking and deep thought from the Black liberation movement and from indigenous liberation movements. And it's called all kinds of things, like in indigenous Chicano and Mexicano communities, it's called like Nepantla, that is like the idea that once we actually are people that, like we're resilient people, and we need to think about what are some of the really hard things that our elders and our ancestors have survived to get us here, that we're not here by accident, we didn't just wake up out of nothing, and that we have quite a bit of learning to do about what our ancestors have done to get us here, right? And so for us, it's sort of a helpful framework to think about, because I think so many of us come out of very reactionary politics, myself included. Like I was very, very angry. When I was a young person, and I was very like clear about who the enemy was, and then you realize that the world is not that simple, right? That it's not just about them versus us. And then I feel like my politics were really radically changed by sort of transformative justice. What it actually means to be able to be a part of the transformative liberation movement that takes into account that we're trying to create something that we have never done before. We're not trying to replicate something or model something after something else, but it's like we're really trying to create something that many of us have never lived through. Like I've never lived through like what a true democracy looks like. I don't know, has anybody? Raise your hand if you have first-hand experience with true democracy, because we need to talk to you. Or like what it means to live in a world that is free of oppression, or pre-colonization. And a lot of us end up doing and for us, like it also means that we're doing cultural reclamation work, we're doing legacy work, we're doing work that acknowledges that our people survived and came from traditions that oftentimes the traditions that we have and our sort of shared beliefs are foreign to us. They were actually not of our people, they were imposed on our people, and then we took them on, and then this is just the way that it's been rolling, right? So it's kind of helping to introduce sort of a different sort of frame of things, and again, that is connected to vision. And not just like, what are we gonna be? What does our organizational plan say about where we need to be in 3 years? But like long-term vision, right? Like how will our, like a lot of indigenous folks that come out of movement traditions and whatever, they're like, everything that you do, you have to think about the impact of 7 generations down the road, right? Like that kind of vision. Like what is it that we want people in 7 generations from now to have? Like what do we want their world to look like? What do we want their educational experience to be like? What do we want their cultural experience to be like? And not just like in a woo-woo kind of crunchy way, which I can also harp about, but I'm like, I want it to feel great and fantastic. But it's like, what are some of the concrete kind of institutional sort of things that have to happen between now and then for that to be possible? So I wanted to read something to you all, which is a little bit crunchy, but just bear with me. And it's by one of my favorite political writers and poets, because we use the work that organized in school as just a way to sort of think about third space as well, and also introducing sort of like the concept of the justice of magical realism for many of us that are cultural workers, right? Thinking about sort of what that looks like. And it's called Dreaming of Guatemala. I imagine the justice of magical realism. And if justice came to Guatemala, Rigoberta Menchú would be president. And a generation of leaders, some of the best of the country, would be alive to lead. Not only in Guatemala, but in Honduras, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Chile, Argentina, South Africa, and East Timor. The disappeared would talk among the living, and there would be resurrection in the mass graves and among the masses. There would be no armies. I've wondered, what do people dream of in Guatemala?
What if their dreams slipped outside of their minds for all to see? Dreams with cigarette burns and floating limbs, butterflies for dead ancestors, and bright red healing thread for stitching wounds and democracy's cloth. Then would a country find its reality so undeniable, so irreconcilable that justice would arrive. And not because of a democratically elected president, but when the people dreamed, their dreams came true. Thank you all. I'm going to pass it off to Pharr to do a closing part. Patricia Gonzalez, and it's called Dreaming of Guatemala. And I'm happy to share the link and all that.
Great, so now, time for discussion and questions and comments, and particularly your experiences with community and with doing community work, wherever that community is. Sometimes communities are places, and sometimes they're groups of people. So, we'll start. Anyone who wants to start off, you can ask us any questions, yes? And hopefully we will have the courage to try to answer them.
My name is Terry, and my question is because we got a lot of really good information today, and since you have a lot of knowledge in it, what is the one thing that, as we leave here, we should not do? Because so many times in different organizations, you see everyone with a bunch of information and a bunch of tools, and then they implement it the worst way possible. So what is, if we really wanted to change, what are the 3 things that once we leave here we should not do or try to avoid?
Somebody out there want to answer that? I would say to avoid hierarchies in the best way that you can. I think that when I think of oppression in all of our lives, I think of the way hierarchies work. Whether it's in the corporate hierarchy, which is also the way many of our nonprofits work. We search and search and search and search for what we call executive directors. What kind of language is that? People that have 3 employees will have an executive director. What the devil are the other directors? You know what I mean? It's like, it's so, it just makes my head go, like this. So I would say that. I would say the hierarchy that has hurt us so much through religious fundamentalism. That belief that particularly in the within this country, there's all kinds of religious fundamentalism around the world that has it's not just a religious fundamentalism, it's a kind of a right-wing fundamentalism. I think that has hurt us so much. But when you think of this notion that there's God giving direct message to man as in male, and then have the power over wife, children, and the whole dominion of animals on the earth, that is not a hierarchy that has served us well. So within our organizations, I'd say don't go forth and do that. Go forth and see the best collective work that you could do, the best ways that you can figure out both leadership and sharing power. And that's something to grapple with, because leadership often goes to that one charismatic person. Where are you? It's like, excuse me.
I would say that in my experience, one of the things that particularly I feel like it's a generational thing maybe. So I feel definitely accountable to that in that way, which is like a little bit of like the kind of political fundamentalism or purism. And by fundamentalism, I mean that like we are waiting for the perfect campaign, an issue in order to jump on a train that actually takes us anywhere, right? And I hear this a lot, and particularly like coming out of youth organizing and working a lot with young people, it's like I come out of a political generation or a generation of people organizing. We're very good at breaking things down like 12 different ways from Sunday, right? We're like, that was classist and racist and ableist and like, kind of half-assed and just, we could just like throw it, we could just break it down, right? And like, so a critical muscle, like it's getting like worked out all the time, right? And we like are out there criticizing strategies of like people that have been like running them for 30 years. right? And what do we know? Because, you know, like I'll say it, like I was 17 and I was like running my mouth. I was like, I don't know what they're talking about, they don't know nothing about, you know, my experiences and, you know, like whatever, which is, you know, like that's real, right? Like that's what I love about working with young people, that they are just righteous and they will tell you what's up. But there's, you know, like, but there's a particular kind of behavior that gets rewarded in our movement that's just about like, just critical, right? That it's like about critiquing work. And it's actually not about building kind of like what we call kind of like our whole muscle, right? It's not building like the way that we believe like in our best selves, that is not helping us to actually have the courage to actually join a work that is not perfect, and that is maybe a long ways from being perfect, but that is actually really asking us to be transformed in the service of the work, both individually and collectively. And I think that that's a really important thing to say, because you're never going to have the perfect group, and oftentimes what I say is that the people who show up are exactly the people that need to be there, right? So it doesn't mean that like, you know, like the West Michigan coalition of only, you know, like 99% white people are the ones that need to lead like the racial and economic justice, you know, movement of West Michigan. But they're the people that are the right people to begin having a conversation about what needs to be done and to work and to help figure out in their communities that they are a part of, like what is the strategy to help maybe hold accountability over other white people about what happens with that, right? Not to go and give direction to like other communities, but to work within like the communities that you're a part of, right? And I think that there's much to be said about how we can intervene, about transforming and making organizations better. And I think that that work is absolutely critical and needed. But I think getting away from like the kind of perfect, what the perfect movement looks like, what the perfect politic is, what the perfect group of people to lead that politic are, but instead to actually take the risk and be involved in part of work that other people are also going to be critical of, right? And learning to take that with that, because I think that that was one of the things, like I remember the first time I facilitated something and it like just fell apart and it was horrible, and like I cried when I saw the evaluations, and I was like, I will never do this again, it was horrible, you know, and it's like that just happens, and I think it was like Suzanne who was just like, and then you will get over it, and then it'll be fine, and then you'll do it. You know, and it's like, okay, like it's scary, right? It's scary to be, and I think it's easier to be like from a distance, like criticizing the kind of things that other people are doing versus actually taking the risk to say that this is a movement, we will step on each other's toes, we will have conflict, and we will deal with it, and we will move on, and it'll be fine. So that's, I feel like one of the things that I would say, like particularly with like starting new things, that it's like, great, you know, like we're all here, and like here's what we can actually do now to help transform what's happening.
Great. And I wonder if there was anyone else who wanted to answer that question before I call on somebody else. Like, things that make you want to run screaming out of the room. Okay. Yeah.
I wanted to say more so to, I wanted to say more so to, I love the fact that you kept drilling home community tonight. And I've had some discussions in the last few days, and more so with my brothers and sisters in the LGBT community this is such a great message tonight, because when we talk about community, the one thing we do not have here is a strong LGBT community. It's divided or it's non-existent. But to build that and start creating a strong, I know you're shaking your head at me, Lisa, a strong community, it's time we start building each other up. And I love the fact when you mentioned the older generation having a responsibility to the younger generation to pass on that torch and to teach the younger generation the struggles that happened. I think about when I came out in 1984, you didn't tell coworkers. But I think it was easier for me than my brothers and sisters in 1974. Mm-hmm. And so it's the thing about having the gratitude about that history and building each other up in helping lift the community up. And that goes for any community, but I think it's important that we really start doing that.
Great. Anyone else? Good.
I have a question. I don't know if you or someone else in this room might know. The question is, do we know anything about the motivation of people who intentionally hurt themselves through decisions and policies that they support? Now, I'll use a couple of examples of people voting, who don't have access to health care and complain about it, but then go ahead and vote for candidates who will keep them from that health care, and they know that.
I also noticed this past week we had a gender equity issue come up again with Title IX. I don't know if anyone saw that in the paper, but a couple of weeks, almost a decade ago, there was a lawsuit
Veracrúz, Michigan High School Athletic Association, challenging their application of Title IX because Michigan was one of 48 or 46 states that were, the girls, not the boys, were playing volleyball and basketball out of season to make room for the boys. So now they're in compliance and people aren't attending the girls' games. And I kind of followed this and it got reported in the comments on Amplify, which I know can be toxic at times, but the comments, even from parents, and I'm thinking, these people have to have daughters, were just awful. And I think, now why would they not support something that would help their daughters? You know, I'm just trying to think sometimes, you know, why don't people stick up for themselves? Is it because the religion tells them not to do that? But I never understand that. You know, I've had that, even with my own parents, I've said, but you realize the people you're voting for aren't going to help you. I mean, that's not a good decision for you. Is that, I don't know if that's...
Now you've gotten in an area that I really care about, women's basketball. I live in the land of the lady balls, Tennessee, and so, want to get me riled up. We're right on the mark. But I'd like for someone else in the room to answer that. And I'm serious about loving women's basketball. This is Thursday night, and I'm missing it right now.
Very serious. I'm not allowed to talk in the living room while okay.
Yeah. Did someone else want to speak to that? Yes, that'd be great.
Well, there was a group that really made a push for this change that this was talking about. We spent a lot of money. Fortunately, they had a wonderful attorney in Grand Rapids who worked with them unceasingly. He told me the other day that it's one of the best cases he has ever done. He really enjoyed it. And he still hasn't been paid, you know, for his work, of course. But I don't know. I think that somehow that they really got a lot of things done. It was difficult, very, very difficult, because the state group just would not even listen to them. They wouldn't return the phone calls, you know, that sort of thing. It was that bad. And they finally have gotten somewhere, and I'm with Kristen that, you know, what is it now that they've gotten these steps forward? And somehow I think people in the community who are really concerned about this, maybe what would help is if they reconnected with that group that worked so hard and had, you know, somehow got some more support for them and got more in the news or whatever it is, because it's just discouraging what has happened now. You know, and now people seem to kind of sit back and say, oh well, they got what they wanted, and so now let them, you know, go their own way, and it's taking a step back. So maybe finding out the people who care about that particular issue, go to the schools, go to the athletic directors, get back in touch with that women's group that really made something happen and try to fight it out with them.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Jen.
I had a question that kind of ties to what Kristen just said.
Can you give your name?
I'm Deepak. I had a question that's tied to what Kristen just asked. Oh, sorry. I got to know my future educational technology. I had a question tied to what Kristen just asked, and basically my biggest problem is how do you talk to a conservative? I'm serious, because Anderson wrote this book, How Do You Talk to a Liberal, if you must. So the thing is that because, I mean, given where we are, I mean, this is the liberal population of West Michigan right here. I mean, this is it. And so, if someone wants to take it out, it's really simple right now. Anyway, it's the conservatives who are in power, and if we as liberals want to bring about social change, part of that involves talking to those folk. And my question is, how do we do that effectively? Because, I mean, honestly, my problem is I don't want to talk to them. But you have to, and so that's my question. Like, how do you talk And not just to the folk who are stabbing into the foot by voting for measures that are clearly contrary to their own interests, but I'm talking about those people who are actually in power and who run things. How do we talk to them and actually be taken seriously? That's my question.
So I wonder if any of you all come from families like mine, where some are Democrat and some are Republican. I have 2 Tea Party people. They have. So it runs from very conservative Tea Party folks to me. I grew up in a family of 10 people, counting my mother and father, and you can imagine cousins and nieces and great nieces. And now I have a great. So the first question to me is, how do you talk to your family? I mean, about all of this, absolutely all of this, because if we can't talk to our families, I know it seems easier to talk to the person on the street, but that deeper place is there where we want to find home and we want to find change. However we configure family, doesn't necessarily have to be the biological family, but however we configure family, but it's really, most often it's in a family of origin or a family of adoption where we feel, those great conflicts. But also what you're talking about, the question you asked about people voting against their self-interest, that I think is a relatively new phenomenon. And it has been carefully orchestrated, carefully organized. But the ways in which we talk about Alinsky organizing tonight has been done in this country. And it makes me want to do something we don't have time for, which is to give a very fast overview of the development of the right since the campaign of Mary Goldwater. But it has been a great strategy that has gone on in the country since 1964. And with the buying up of media outlets, all the talk radio across the country, then the development of larger media outlets on cable TV, so that there's this barrage of information, and also the very careful coming out of the Reagan administration, which was a carefully designed plan of election and then of carrying out policy, of dismantling and creating that separation between people, moving to individualism, moving to privatization, moving to the stock market economy, moving, I can just name things, racializing of every public issue, crime, drugs, welfare, name it, to setting up an anti-taxation movement till everybody now is broke, and developing a tremendous sense of scarcity. That when every issue became racialized, then they were able to create an icon called the welfare queen. Everybody remembers that, or if you haven't, maybe you've studied it, to develop this iconic figure who was having baby after baby after baby after baby, and she was gendered and she was racialized, she was black, in order to get more than decent working folks like you and me have, and doing it off our money. And that created the strongest myth of scarcity in this country, that racialization of issues, and then the development of that iconic welfare queen, so that you have now a country that is in disrepair. Our infrastructure, our roads, our bridges, our schools, you name it. We don't have the money to make them what they should be. We don't have a taxation system that works for us, and we have a whole population, not the entire population, but a very large population of people who vote against their own self-interest. Yeah.
I mean, I feel like one good example about that is one of the things that if you study economics, as many people do, that you also find out that, for example, like in the U.S. kind of economic index about poverty, like the poverty index is that, I think it was last year, that it's like if you are middle class, you're making above is it like $85,000? And that yet most poor people identify as middle class. And so you have this question where you're like, actually, like the IRS or something says that like you have to be making at least $85,000 if you are middle class, right? And in terms of like taxes and all of this other things. And people making $30,000 a year are like, but I'm middle class. I'm not poor. I'm not working class. And you're like, really interesting. So I feel like you also have a lot of what that means, that people are also identifying in ways and aligning themselves in relationship to a ruling class that they're actually not even a part of, right? And I think that that's a huge legacy, I think, of, of slavery for a lot of us that has some relationship to race and ethnicity in this country. It's a huge relationship to colonization and to internalized, I feel like, oppression, that it's like, we don't want to be on the side of the people getting their, their butts handed to them. We want to be on the other side, right? And so I think that there's also quite a bit of like confusion, like about what that actually looks like. And I think in the queer community, we have the issue of same-sex marriage being a huge contentious issue even in the LGBT community, because it's seen as some people as kind of an assimilationist issue, right? That it's like, well, if we could just get married, then like all of our problems would be fixed, versus like, let's talk about universal health care, let's talk about violence on the streets, let's talk about, teen suicides. And so it's not to say that like, those issues are not valid to me, not just that they're not valued, or that there's not like underneath that a real longing for ceremony, or a real longing for like having safety and having the kind of relationships that we want to have and have that validated. That need is real, right? But to prioritize something that is about we're just like you guys and we just want the same things that you have is actually voting, I think also, right? Like it's not necessarily in that particular example voting against our own best self-interest, but it's like, where do we put our energy behind, and where are we identifying as the issues that are the most critical to our survival, right? And I feel like that's another like example of that. And it was just interesting because we're like, I know tons of people who would say that they're middle class and they are not making $85,000 a year, right? So when they hear on Fox News like, middle class, they're coming after your money, they're like, that's right, they're coming after my money. And I'm like, what money do you have? So it's like, you have that, I feel like, happening as well, that it's just part of us, I think, trying to, like work that out within our own communities as well. Any other questions? Pushback, shout. Yes, we have it in the back. Yes, waving. You can send it.
Suzanne? Hi, my name is Gordy. I don't feel like you answered this question. You answered it with a question. How do you talk to your family? So I just want to make a comment. I'm sort of torn, because I'm from a conservative family, and I quit talking to them because of experience where I've tried to, and I've been shouted down or ignored and not listened to. And so at one point it's like, why make the effort? On the one hand. On the other hand, my response to how do you talk to conservative or your family is simply, what you said tonight was, what are your shared values? Right? So put aside political views and try to figure out what things that you share together, and work through that. What can you do with that? But it's sort of like it's a dialectical relationship, because, like I said, in my experience, I have a family who I feel like they're no longer willing to learn. They're ignorant. They don't want to be open to other perspectives. We share some values. I mean, I grew up in that family. I haven't jettisoned, some core values that I've gotten from my mother and father. But it's like, can't move beyond that, So it's really, really difficult. I recently read a book called Deer Hunting with Jesus. I don't know, some of you might be familiar with that, but it's just a guy who grew up in a West Virginia coal town. And he's talking about many, many people in this country who are less than high school educated, who work in coal mines and things like that, through generation and generation and generation. Essentially, one of his points was, this is a group of people who are fundamentalist in many, many ways, and they're just sort of stuck, right? So again, how do you talk to these people? It's very, very challenging, but those are those are some of the roadblocks that we face, I think, and I don't think there's any easy answers. But again, I've been frustrated with my own family, so I just sort of I just got to move on.
Thanks for checking me on answering a question with a question.
Can you pass, oh, I'm sorry, yes, you, and then we have a couple of other folks.
Yeah, I guess I wanted to kind of address the idea of how do you talk to conservatives. I have actually two suggestions. At one point before the international economic crisis, a lot of people agreed that capitalism was a good idea. That was a very right-wing thing to hold that corporatocracy, was the way to move forward and all these things. So I think we need to be talking to conservatives in a period where their ideas are actually weak and don't actually work for us anymore. That is, that the ideas that they once held could work for us, we can show them very contemporary examples that they actually do not. So the first thing I suggest is know what the conservative is trying to say and be able to relate it historically or contemporarily. So right now is a time of weakness for the people in corporations and people in power because their systems kind of falling apart on them. So I would say talk to conservatives when their ideas are weak. Also, in Tunisia, Egypt, there's been a wave of revolts for those that have been following international politics. And a level of struggle over there is extremely high. We're talking about people that cannot eat, people that are starving, and when you watch the videos, you can actually see people taking to the streets and saying that we don't care what religion you adhere to, we're all out here today. And they start talking about Christianity and all these things, all these different waves of people on the left and on the right, and they're all on the streets. And this is an example when the level of struggle is very high. And so I think when we look at conservatives, we don't always have to look at them as our opponent. If you say that there are conservatives that vote against what they genuinely want, in life, we have to talk to these people and bring forth that struggle is very real, and so I think we are in a good position to talk to conservatives again when the level of struggle is very high. And we know that the struggle actually permeates over to people that are conservative as well. That our struggles and what we want actually fall somewhere in line with what they want as well. And then I also had a question about, I hear all these words about how we need to be able to leadership, all these ideas, but I have a problem kind of doing work on this campus because I feel like I've been doing work in Chicago ever since I was 16 around people that just like a lot of work in Chicago, and I feel like when I come here, I'm able to provide a strong voice sometimes, and I can move people over to my ideas, but people are very, very quick to equate an articulate person with authority, with bureaucracy, and I see it all the time. People come to a meeting, and if they don't hear 100% participation, they're quick to snap their fingers and say there's authority here, there's bureaucracy here. And so how do you work around the fine line of being a leader and I guess what people mischaracterize as authority? Because I think a lot of people that want to lead clash, and that's where they clash. Some people want to lead, some people just want to follow, some people want to eventually lead, And so I've been struggling with that a lot. I see a lot of people around me who I can work with, and I see a lot of potential to work with them. But I think they have a very false mischaracterization of authority and bureaucracy. And also, I like this idea of all of us working together, this very universal idea of a different kind of world we want to create. But the idea is very universal, and I feel a lot of times in today's women and gender studies is actually the kind of theories around that are against the idea of any sort of universal even existing. And those that, I'm not here to critique, people that are in that, but I know a lot of the ideas are against any sort of universal pervading idea. So if we all have a vision and want to create another world, it sounds very universal when people speak and when we talk about struggle, but the ideas that exist in the institution actually denounce any sort of universal idea. So,
Back table there.
Okay, hi, my name is Jessica Gladden. Sorry, the last point there, I'm about to jump back to where we were talking about conservatives and liberals. I'm actually not about to tell you about sides. I'm actually about to tell you about a movement called the No Labels movement. Some of the things I've been hearing here is like, how do you talk to a conservative? How do you talk to a liberal? Well, you talk to them like they're a human being, for one. You need to put the facts out there. You talk to them, you bring those common things. Conservatives and liberals have more in common than they do different. If you just kind of talk to them. So, I just want to throw it out there. There's a No Labels grassroots movement. It started in New York. December 13th was our founders meeting. I was there. And the movement is really about setting aside those labels and dealing with the real issues. Just putting them out there and coming up with solutions. When you get people in the room and you strip those labels, you'll be amazed of what they can do.
I had it's Pauline, is that right? Paulina. Paulina. You said something that really struck something in me, is that it's kind of this third space or transformative place that you get to. I would love to see a conversation where animal rights was included in social justice issues. I think that as we're all expanding our horizons and opening our eyes to so many different things, I would really love to see a platform where basic animal rights were included in that. Because if you want to talk about subjugation and just exploitation of the weakest of the weak, until we can really talk about how we treat animals, I think that we're remiss if we don't bring that up. Thank you.
I think it leads us from not just an idea of intersectionality, but of interconnectedness, of how we are connected to animals, how we are connected in the natural world as well.
Hi, I'm Anna. Sorry, I'm a little nervous with the mic, so pardon me. I just wanted to speak to the original comment that was made about the girls' basketball team and about family also, is that in this area and with my family, and I know with a lot of families and a lot of communities, people get to the point where they just say, well, we gave you what you wanted, so that's enough. And I think we need to say that it's not enough. I think it's as simple as that. I think it's, going to my folks, let's say they're very conservative people, if we're talking about conservatives, and saying, you let me bring my girlfriend home for Christmas, but, I can't bring her to the family reunion, but that's not enough. It's not enough to just settle for everything, and I think our generation is kind of a generation that says, well, okay, we'll take that if you give it to us. We'll take a little bit of this, we'll take civil unions over marriage rights, and I think we just need to learn to say that it's not enough for us.
Neglecting the side of the room a little bit. We ain't even looking this way, I'm sorry.
Hi, I'm Kirsten. I just wanted to talk about a few things. To address Fern's concern about women in gender studies, and it's not supposed to be a critique on Fern, and we have a good relationship.
Postmodernism, that's what it is, postmodernism.
Yeah, okay, so. I know what you're saying, I know what you're getting at. So I think there's a difference between what we're talking about with universality in terms of movement building and the difference between the universality that postmodernism and some feminist theory critique. So the type that it would be critiquing is a theory that would claim to be universal for everyone, or a perspective that would be universal for everyone. So just for example, something I'm familiar with,
the idea that Western feminist theory could be universal to all women or to people of all genders around the world. That would be something that postmodern feminist theory would critique, because we can't claim to have one theory for a movement or one belief practice that would help everyone, because we all are coming from different contexts and different locations. But at the same time, we can learn to work in solidarity with people in different contexts and fighting different struggles in order to form a more communal and, I don't want to use the word universal, but it's within solidarity with people around the world, without necessarily claiming to have a universal value system that would apply to everyone. So I think there's a difference between what we're talking about with movement building and what we're critiquing with universal values. So just wanted to throw that out there. And going back to the idea about heroism with organizing, I've seen that a lot, working with people on campus and outside of campus. And I think there are two main ways that manifests itself and two main problems that happen. The first one is that we have a difference between the ideal that we're trying to reach for and then what we have currently today, what our situation is. So we have an ideal that we're all reaching for. We want to eradicate all forms of oppression. Right. But then we also have oppression happening now, before we reach that goal, and we have things that we need to do to make people's lives better now, today. So, for example, in an ideal world, we wouldn't have violence against women happening at such a wide scale, or at all. We wouldn't have sexual assault happening to 25% of women in this country. But that doesn't mean that it's not a valuable struggle to try to have more shelters, to try to have more resources for women who are going through those struggles, because guess what? That's the reality right now. So I think a lot of the disconnect comes when we're talking about organizing and what we should be doing, and then we have people who only want to go for the ideal and people who only want to go for the practical. And we need to figure out how to combine them into one strategy. So we're working for something ideal, and we're also trying to address real lives now. And the other way that I think it manifests itself is not knowing how to meet people where they are. So when we're radically organizing for social change, we have this view that people who identify as just Democrats are somehow not radical enough because the political parties are instantiating all these things, But we cannot ostracize those people who are not quite liberal enough for us, who are not quite radical enough, because that's where we're going to get more supporters from. And it's about movement building, not creating a group of perfect people who have all the perfect radical ideas about anti-oppression in every single area, and we're only going to work with those perfect people who have everything figured out. We need to learn how to work with people who, I have some liberal tendencies. I can agree with that, equality, I'm down. You've got to be able to work with those people to build a movement. Otherwise, you're going to keep the same 10 people organizing all your life. It's not going to become worldwide. So,
Okay, one more. Taking one more person had their hand up, like 10 minutes. I apologize.
And then we have to close out.
Suzanne? Sweet. I didn't know if it was going to be me. Okay, so. Zach. My name is Zach. I guess there's a lot of things I can say right now, but I guess I'll just focus on the one thing that I think I'd like to mention is that sort of what we're oscillating around is trying to understand how to bring people together, how to get an idea about how to make these different political movements possible, how to make these sort of social change. And I think it's very important to remember that we do all, at the core, have very similar, no matter where we stand politically or socially or how we identify ourselves, we really do want the same things. We just have different ways of looking at how we approach that. For example, I had someone kind of provide some insight to me that I thought was particularly profound, saying that you have a conservative movement, the Republican movement, is very much motivated by a certain fear of when they're hit with things that change, when things that are sort of inexplicable or things that threaten their way of life or their perceived way of life, the ways things go. It's sort of a response. Tea Party is kind of a response to the things that they don't necessarily understand. And it's the same sort of fears we have. It's just a different response to that. And I think if we realize and we sort of maintain that empathy, that we understand that we may not necessarily have the same approach to things, we may not necessarily identify ourselves, but universally across this country, across this world, we all have the same goals, and we can meet each other on them. I think we can make the kind of change we're talking about. I think the second that we say that Republicans are so different from Democrats, and people of women and gender studies have so many different ideas from people in other philosophical sort of followings, we stop that. We make it too difficult for ourselves.
we disqualify that, because you cannot have one particular sector, one particular ideology guide everything unless you're talking about what's already existing and maintaining that. If you want change, you have to come together with not only the people that want that change, but you have to make the people that are stopping that change understand that it's in their interest too. And I guess that's my thought.
So, thank you very much for that. This moves us not just to relational organizing, but to transformational organizing, which is what I think you're speaking to very, very eloquently, and thanks for being our final speaker. We want to say, again, thank you for having us here. Thank you for inviting us. We're just going to close out our part, and then you'll come up. How much it means to see what you're doing and how eager we are to see where you're going to go with it. You know, it seems to me there's a lot of organizing to be done on this group of figuring out what is the direction this is going in and what's going to be the outcome with this. And just know that you're in an extraordinary moment, and not a wasted moment, a moment where you've brought good attention and energy and contribution to, and it's remarkable. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing. We're privileged to be a small piece of this.
Yes, thank you so much and for having us. And I just wanted to just highlight, before I totally forgot, that we also gave you guys another handout about how can we reshape power. And there are two more documents that were uploaded to y'all's shared site, which I will not even attempt to name. But yeah, see, I'm not even going to do it. So it's there, and our website is at the bottom of that. So if you feel like, oh, this is great, but we need additional tools or whatever, we have tons of written resources. Some are up on our website and are immediately and easily downloadable. Other things you can let us know about, and we can either shape kind of an activist tree in the South and find it for you, or point you in the right direction of other folks. There's tons and tons of resources. There's never a shortage of really amazing work being developed. So by all means, download those, and if you have questions about this one, we ask that people use them in whichever way is comfortable, including using language directly. The only thing that we ask is that it is sort of acknowledged that that were tools that were developed by some. But other than that, we people use them. If parts that are helpful, please do. If not, change them, scrap them, fit them to your needs, but please use them. So thanks so much for having us.